The President, in his speech for the opening of the Parliament a few weeks ago, pointed to the weak macroeconomic and fiscal situation of the country and highlighted that at the end of 2008, the deficit stood at 1.4 million rupiah, and the total debt currently stands at around $460 million, what is roughly 38% of the GDP. There are also concerns surrounding the large size of the government's recurrent expenditure, the limited diversification of the economy, as it was mentioned a few seconds ago, and low-level foreign exchange reserves. The efforts of the government to address the macroeconomic situation and exercise more fiscal prudence should be noted, particularly the initiative to reduce government expenditure and introduce performance-based budgeting and a medium-term expenditure framework. The World Bank and the IMF have been working closely with the government and will certainly elaborate further on these issues. UNDP has recently, at the request from the government, carried out a rapid assessment of the macroeconomic and poverty situation, which has been made available to all of you and to the government, of course. Mr. President, to build on this assistance, the United Nations stands ready to support the government and the central bank for medium-term macroeconomic projections, leading to the finalization of the medium-term macro and fiscal framework, as well as at the preparation of a credible financing strategy. In addition, the UN system is prepared to support the development of sector strategies through the conduct of sectoral needs assessment, leading to the preparation of costed and prioritized sector strategies. The Maldives has been included among the 8 countries selected for a UNDP-led comparative study on the impact of the global financial and economic crisis in the Asia-Pacific region, which will be presented at the UN General Assembly this year in September. Mr. President, in the face of the impending transition from the LDC to a middle-income country, we invite the government to focus on putting together a robust transition plan to move to more effectively meet and deal with the impending challenges. The early engagement and sensitization of all the key partners, notably in the private sector and all the other partners, will be essential for the success of this transition plan. As such, the steps of the country in putting together an interministerial committee to oversee the development of such a transition plan is a move in the right direction. The UN system will provide assistance to the country in order to facilitate a smooth transition. The United Nations agencies, such as UNCTAD, ESCAP, and UNDP will support the government in preparing a transition strategy, and it is expected that UNCTAD will carry out a comprehensive assessment of the impact of the graduation sometime during the course of 2009. Let us also use this opportunity presented by this forum to discuss and explore with the government some of the issues related to the LDC graduation. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the greatest challenges that confront the new administration is to reach the MDGs for every citizen with equity, given the considerable unevenness of income and social disparities throughout the country. Effectively addressing key concerns, such as the high unemployment and the drug problem, is pressing. Adequate focus on education, increasing employment opportunities for youth and women, and efficiently addressing the drug issues remain definitely crucial. The UN will continue to support the promotion of social and economic equity in the country, as well as the achievement of gender equality. Additional donor support for the country to further propel national priorities towards this and is essential. The new administration's move to more proactively seek out public-private partnership and strengthen the private sector holds much potential as a means to bring basic services to the people. address issues of unemployment, and reduce inequality. We are pleased that this will be discussed within this forum and invite the government that, as it seeks to build new business partners, to also strengthen good policies and practices in the areas of human rights and the treatment of workers. Maintaining people at the center of development will be key to ensure success during the administration's move to further liberalize the economy. In addition, as the government moves to strengthen public-private partnership, it is important that promoting the right to basic services such as education, health, clean water and sanitation, and adequate housing should remain the main responsibility of the national authorities. We encourage the government to move forward to its accession to the ILO, as well as promote corporate social responsibility within the private sector. A recent workshop on social policy led by the Ministry of Finance and Treasury, together with UNICEF, supported the initial development of a Maldives minimum social package. The government's commitment to a vision of social justice and inclusion becomes increasingly pressing in light of the considerable unevenness and social disparity throughout the country. This social protection package will be further developed in the coming months. Today, with the economic downturn and pressures of climate change, the threats to countries have never been higher, and the Maldives has not been spared. Without action, climate change could negate development progress and undermine efforts to reach the MDGs. It is essential to mainstream climate change into development planning at all levels and link development policies with the financing of solutions in order to help the country move to a more sustainable state. The strengthening of mitigating and adaptation measures to build on the National Action Plan for Climate Change Adaptation, the NAPA, is important. There are avenues open to the country to achieve financing the mitigation and adaptation measures. Some of those have been facilitated by UNDP through the Global Environment Fund, GEF. Other UN agencies, like UNICEF and WHO, continue to advocate for environment awareness among children and the health impact of climate change, respectively. However, the expanse of the challenge posed requires a collective support from other partners to further build national capacities and maximize opportunities for addressing climate change and minimizing risks. We commend the President for his intention to make the Maldives the world's first carbon neutral country within the next decade. The current effort of the government, as recently announced by the President, to have an eco-plan in place for going carbon neutral represents an important step towards the effective implementation of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and its Kyoto Protocol. Dear participants, as previously stated, advancing democracy remains essential, especially as the country prepares for the parliamentary and local elections. As such, we hope the upcoming elections will be conducted in a peaceful, free and fair manner. Ladies and gentlemen, I have outlined a few challenges that, in our view, confront the country, not to raise despair, but to take honest measure on the road ahead and to underscore the need for increased support from the various partners of the Maldives. Closing the resource gaps of the country in order to meet the development priorities of the Maldives in the coming years is urgently required. Mr. President and Excellencies, now is the time to address the issues facing the country for long-term sustainability, and there are promising alternatives and policy options that can be pursued. We look forward to hearing from all of you and the government officials on the policies that the government is implementing, as well as the additional support required from the international community and the private sector. I hope that this third MPF will be an effective vehicle to strengthen partnerships towards realizing the goals of the country as it seeks to navigate the new territory of a modern economy and society. In closing, I wish to reiterate the United Nations system assistance to the governments in achieving the Millennium Development Goals, and in so doing, to support narrowing the inequality gap and widening the opportunities available to all Maldivians in order to enable them to drive the development and prosperity of this country. I look forward to successful discussions in the next 2 days and stronger partnership even beyond the NPF. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Petrus Kobizat. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the next item on the agenda is the opening address by His Excellency, Mr. Mohammad Nasheed, President of the Republic of Maldives. May I now invite His Excellency, the President, to deliver his address to the forum. His Excellency, Mr. Mohammad Nasheed, President of the Republic of Maldives.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the Maldives. I have been given a speech to read, and I was just thinking of going ahead with it and reading it. But then I thought maybe if I can actually talk to you, it might perhaps be a little bit better. Sorry for inviting to such a gloomy party. Yes, we have problems, a lot of it. We have economic problems, we have social problems, we have drug abuse, we have juvenile delinquency, we have gang violence, we have child abuse, wife beating, we have religious fundamentalism, we have a lot of problems. People of this country have decided on 28th October 2008 that they want to change all that. So they voted for democracy. Looking around here, I see many very familiar faces, a lot of ambassadors, diplomats who have helped the reform process of this country to assist the people to bring about this change. Not very often you get homegrown democracy in a 100% Muslim country. The people of this country have been able to galvanize the public to political activism. They have been able to amend the constitution to reflect a more civilized society. They have been able to have a free and fair election, and above all, they have been able to have a very smooth transfer of power. Now they did all this, in my mind, because they wanted to change all that, all the gloom and doom. Now, we are, of course, in the process, and we haven't finished anything, and we continue to work along the process so that we can bring it to a more, in a sense, more sustainable end. Democracy is very fragile, and you need to consolidate it. And to consolidate it, of course, it helps if you have favorable economic conditions. But then we are not blessed with it right now. Then again, we've always fought against odds, and we have been able to come out of it, and we have been able to succeed. None of you would have thought that this government would actually come into play in this country. 3 years back, or even 6 months before, you would have doubted that the people of this country would actually come out and change the autocratic system. But it has happened. A lot of people have worked for it, and we have been able to bring about this change. Now, moving from here, of course we have to be very careful, vigilant, and we have to be able to deliver all the promises that we made. And of course it is true that in delivery we will be able to sustain democracy. To my mind, the Maldives stands at a very historic juncture. We can continue with the reform process of democratic reform, or we can revert back to where we were before. We certainly are not going to let that happen. And I don't believe that the people of this country are willing to go back where they came from. And therefore, we should be able to come out with the changes, and we should be able to deliver the promises to the people. I am not worried, and I don't see that the road is so blocked. And I really do see many opportunities from the present economic climate, from the present environmental climate, from the present climatic change issues, and also from the social issues of drug abuse and gang violence in Mali. I always see very many opportunities from these tragedies. I think if we try to address these issues in a more optimistic manner, we might be able to use them for our benefit. We might be able to use them to come up with totally new systems. If you take the economic conditions that we have, we need to build a fair amount of infrastructure. Now, the previous government, in their attempts to win the hearts and minds of the people, while continuing with autocratic rule, nepotism and corruption, while doing that, if you were to win the people's hearts and minds, then you are very often led to believe that if you go on spending, and if you promise the people all sorts of goodies and all sorts of facilities, perhaps they might change around. In my mind, this was the thinking behind the previous government, or the last 3 years. The idea was that it was not quite possible to bring about the political changes, the democratic changes, the real changes. But then, because of that, you had to go on promising the people very many things that they couldn't deliver. In the past, the government would come out with a budget of about 7-8 billion. During the last 2-3 years, we suddenly saw that increasing to 12-13 billion. Now, this is because they had to promise the people all the facilities that they thought that the people wanted. So they came out with a huge excess program, building many, or attempting to build many harbors in a very short period of time. They started building a lot of drainages, sewages, roads, harbors, airports. There was a huge public sector investment program that the country, of course, cannot finance. But that had to be promised at that instance because this was the only way to win the vote. Now, what we were selling was something totally very different. What we were selling was freedom, human rights, free expression, a good life. And we didn't, therefore, quite have to find all these material things to win. But now that we've won, or at least the people have won, now we are in a situation that they do remember all these promises. All the harbors, all the drainages, all the extra blocks of classrooms, the health centers. And all these items have been budgeted, apparently, which means that they are included in the budget that was presented to the parliament. But of course, there never was any money behind it. So we are now in a situation where we cannot come out and say, look, we can't do this. We can't do this harbor. And we can't do this sewerage. Because in their mind, it was the sewerage. There was the talk of a sewerage. And in fact, there might have perhaps been a demonstration on the sewerage. Or in fact, there might have been a few posters about the school. So we really now have to be able to do something with the infrastructure program, PSIP program. The government doesn't have the money. We decided that the best way to go forward would be to corporatize the infrastructure program. We decided that there will be people who would want to invest in the Maldives. Now, this country has produced better returns than any country. You ask the European investors who have invested in this country. 20 years ago, they came here with about $300,000-400,000. They have got a very handsome return, 10-20-fold, in billions of dollars, exactly from this country, and they are therefore quite aware of the kind of returns that this country gives. Mind you, the only thing that they're selling is not just the beach, the sun and the sand, but also water and electricity to the tourist. Money made in these resorts are also by selling utilities. And we have the expertise. Kuldufushi sewerage plant, drainage system, apparently is going to cost the government $8 million. Now, if you ask Mr. Dean how much the sewerage system here has cost him, he would tell you that not more than $500,000. It's amazing. It really is quite amazing how we can spend $7 million for Kuldufushi drainage, and Mr. Dean can't spend more than $1 million for the drainage system here. So we would be able to, I'm quite sure that there is scope for private investments in utilities in this country, especially if we can network the resorts and the inhabited islands. We have a very peculiar situation. This country has 2 countries in it. Right next to a third world underdeveloped island, you would have an European extremely rich island. Now, all what we are saying is, if we can share the utilities, production and distribution of these 2 islands, we will be home and dry. There won't be a problem. I think if banks, utility companies, and other investors can extend their imagination outside the narrow frameworks of business plans and all sorts of things, just start believing, then I'm sure that we can make it happen. It is happening. Very soon in Toddu, an Italian tourism company who has invested in the Maldives for the last 20 years would invest in the utilities of that island. We are seeking out resort owners who would be willing to stop producing utilities and outsource that to a third party who would be willing to produce utilities for the resort and the inhabited island. If we can work this model out, I think we will be able to satisfy the infrastructure program. So I'm not really quite worried about, all that worried about the infrastructure promises that we have made. So we can actually come out and do that. Most importantly, this country has given a very good return to European investors. Right now, we have more than $5 billion of European investments, and we would be producing better returns than any other portfolio that they have. So in a sense, in terms of providing utilities and facilities and roads and so on and so forth and housing, we have a small plan which we hope that it will work, and we are able to develop that plan. Now the government also has huge expenses, and we don't have all this money in the budget to go on with these expenses. Even after having, let's say, in a sense, been able to corporatize the public sector investment program, we are still left with huge government expenditure. So we go into the government budget and try to find out corporate activities within the government. One very good example would be regional airports. Now, right now they are a burden on the state, on the budget. But this is, it need not be at all. If we can find joint venture partners who would run regional airports, ports and harbors, I'm sure they need not anymore be a burden on the budget. We can corporatize that, and we think, therefore, in 2 years, we would be able to come out with a surplus. We do two things. One is we privatize the former PSIP program. Two, we corporatize any corporate activity that is in government right now. Waste management, for instance. Municipal services, for instance. And waste management apparently now is not waste. People want to buy it. People want to make electricity out of it. So we feel that if we can achieve these two goals, we would be able to balance the books, maybe not by the end of this year, but by the end of next year.